And I am really pleased to introduce Dr. Lisa Vig, a popular speaker in this series for several years. She's board certified in geriatrics and palliative care. She cares for patients at the VA Puget Sound Healthcare System, where she's chair of their ethics consultation service. She's also an associate professor of medicine in UW's Division of Gerontology and Geriatric Medicine. Dr. Vig enjoys teaching the principles of geriatrics, palliative care, and ethics. She's interested in clinician wellness and runs a monthly professional development seminar for geriatrics and palliative care fellows. Tremendous expertise to share with us today on decisional capacity. Welcome, Dr. Vig.
Cool. Hey, thanks. Thanks for that. All right, here we go, everybody. And thanks for being here. So, oh, goodness gracious. All right. Well, so starting out, I don't have any relevant conflicts of interests. And just a reminder that the sometimes snarky views that I express are mine and do not represent the VA. So, objectives. What I'm hoping you will all get out of this is that by the end, you'll be able to identify 4 different realms where capacity may be assessed. You'll be able to explain the 4 decision-making abilities that are assessed in determining capacity to make medical decisions. You'll be able to name some of the common myths around decisional capacity and also be able to describe the concept of supported decision-making. So Barb just mentioned the 4 M's of geriatrics. I threw in 5 because I think that's sort of fun. And as a reminder, our talk today focuses on 2 of them, both mind and what matters most. And before I get into everything, it's February 29th. It's Leap Day. So happy Leap Day to everybody. And if you have been sitting in front of a computer all day, I would urge you to stand up and leap around a little to get things moving, and then you can sit down and pay attention. Okay, here we go. So capacity, what are we talking about? And I sort of like this definition because it links capacity with informed consent and with ethics in general. So I'll just read it to you. The capacity to make one's own decisions is fundamental to the ethical principle of respect for autonomy and is a key component of informed consent to medical treatment. Now, I mentioned that there are different types of capacity. Here are 4, and I thought we could talk about each of them a little bit. So there's financial capacity, there's testamentary capacity, dispositional capacity, and then decisional capacity for medical decisions. So first, talking a little bit about financial capacity. So that's sort of the ability to manage your own finances. And to do that, you need to have different abilities, right? So you need knowledge of, your assets, your income. You need skills. You need to be able to buy things that you need. You need to be able to pay your bills. Maybe you even need to balance your checkbook, right? And then you need to have good judgment because older people and people with cognitive impairment are at risk for financial exploitation. The VA has actually created this handout about this, which a colleague shared with me, and it's really good. So if you Google sort of VA education series financial capacity, you will get to it. And there's a lot of, I thought, helpful information and links to where you can get even more information. So I'd urge you to do that. So I think we all know about scams that are out there. I found this piece that sort of had a list of scams. And I guess maybe I'm naive. I didn't realize how many they are out there. So there's like the sweetheart scam, the home repair contractor fraud scam, utility company impersonators, pigeon drop scam, handkerchief switch bank scams, and then the predatory lending, identity theft, and the stuff that we're familiar with. So it's a tough world out there. And financial abuse is very prevalent. And it's often underreported because people are kind of embarrassed that they got suckered into something, right? So this piece that I found mentioned a meta-analysis of nearly 42,000 people who were 50 years and older, who were cognitively intact, hey, like me, right? And of them, apparently 1 in 18 gets scammed annually. And then there was this study, the National Elder Mistreatment Study, that had nearly 6,000 people who were 60 years and older. And apparently of them, 5% reported financial abuse in the current or past year by a family member. So that sort of broke my heart. So be aware, there's a lot of this out there. Now, there are instruments that can be used to assess financial capacity, but most of them are fairly lengthy. When I reached out to different colleagues from different disciplines, trying to figure out, well, who does this? It seems like it's done by different disciplines in different places. So I can't tell you that where you are, it's obviously, the speech pathologist. I think these are the people who are probably best suited to do it. So neuropsychology, speech, and occupational therapy. It's also important to consider calling adult protective services if there are concerns about exploitation, because they can do a more in-depth evaluation. I know you're not all in Washington, but in Washington, just so you have a sense of this, APS will get involved when there is a vulnerable adult, and they have different categories of vulnerable adults. So it can be somebody 60 years of age or older who's not able to take care of themselves, or someone who has a legal guardian or has a conservatorship. It can be someone who's got a developmental disability, although apparently there are legal definitions about who qualifies. Anybody who's admitted to a facility, anybody receiving services from home health, hospice, or a licensed home care agency, or anybody receiving care from a personal aide. So that's information on financial capacity. The next one is testamentary capacity. And so this is the ability to complete a legal document, such as a will. So not a living will that we might do in a healthcare setting, but I guess a last will and testament for your stuff. It also applies to any other documents that are going to be completed in a lawyer's office, and the attorney is going to determine if someone has the ability to do this or not. Next one is dispositional capacity, and what's that? That's an assessment of the capacity to live independently. And similarly to an assessment of capacity to make a medical decision, we want to know if the person really understands and whether they can explain the risks and benefits and alternatives to going home. And I think in these cases, it's often very helpful to have occupational therapy weigh in on what ADLs and IADLs the person is able to do. There's a very good article by Bourgeois that you can find that sort of goes through how to do an assessment. So I encourage you to take a look at that. So then the next one, decisional capacity for medical decisions. So that's what we're going to spend the remainder of this talking about. So patients need decision-making capacity to do or not do a lot of things. So to accept or refuse medical treatment, to leave the hospital against medical advice, to participate in research, to complete an advance directive, or where it's legal to request medications to end one's life through death with dignity or medical aid in dying. So I thought it'd be fun to start with a case. So this is a case of Mr. G. This is a made-up case, and this is a picture from the internet to make the slides more interesting. So keep that in mind. So Mr. G is a 76-year-old man who has mild dementia, cirrhosis, emphysema, peripheral vascular disease, and a slow-healing leg ulcer. Dressing changes on this ulcer are painful for him. He is confused at times with periods of increased disorientation and difficulty maintaining attention. So he's delirious. So we're going to do something kind of fun. We'll see if this works. So the question for you guys is, what do you think? Based on what I told you, and I didn't give you very much information, I realize that, can he make a medical decision about pain management? So what you got to do if you want to play is get your phone out and scan this QR code. It'll take you to a website where you can put in your answer. And then, see, it's working. This is so fun. Thank you for playing. I love when this works. It doesn't always work, but so some people think he can, some people think he can't, some people think he's not sure. Okay. Appreciate you guys playing. That was fun. So, as I told you, I didn't give you much information. So I'm going to talk a little bit about capacity, and then we'll come back and I'll give you more information about him. So prevalence of incapacity from studies that are out there. So healthy older patients, less than 3% of them are incapacitated. So just because you're old doesn't mean you can't figure this stuff out. In people with mild cognitive impairment, about 20% of them have incapacity. Of medicine inpatients, about 26%. People with Parkinson's disease, about 42%. Nursing home residents, about 44%. And Alzheimer's disease, about 54%. So yes, over half of people with Alzheimer's disease can't make their own decisions, but about half of them also can. So again, thinking of problems with cognition, a lot of people that can still make decisions. And I put this here just to remind us that when people are impaired, a lot of the time it's not recognized by clinicians. So clinicians only recognize that somebody's impaired about 42% of the time. So one myth about decisional capacity, I will debunk, so that just because someone has dementia or some other psychiatric diagnosis doesn't automatically mean that they are incapacitated. And this is even addressed in our Washington state law, which I think is sort of cool. It says age, eccentricity, poverty, or medical diagnosis alone shall not be sufficient to justify a finding of incapacity. So I like that. So how do we go about figuring out if someone has decisional capacity or not? Well, usually what we do is assess these 4 decision-making abilities. So understanding, appreciating, reasoning, and choosing. And what do those mean? So understanding has to do with, does the patient really get the fact of what their diagnosis is? What are you making a decision about? What are the different options on the table? What are the risks and benefits of a given treatment? And what are the alternatives? So do they understand all of that information? Then there's appreciating. And what's that? That has to do with this decision affecting you and your body. So the way I think about it is if somebody is in denial, they may have a very good understanding of all the stuff you tell them, but they don't have an appreciation that what you're talking about is going to affect them. Hopefully that makes sense. And then there's reasoning. And what reasoning is taking all that information and sort of weighing it against your own values and preferences and making a decision, but being able to explain how you made that decision. And then choosing is having made the decision and ideally coming to the same place on different occasions, if you have time to do that. So let me give you an idea about how this might play out. So if we're going to do one of these capacity assessments, we first want to know what the patient already knows. And I remember years ago, one of my psychiatry colleagues said that when he does capacity assessments, he realized that he can't automatically assume that the patient has been told all the pertinent medical information. So you want to start out with getting a sense of what they know. So tell me about your condition, what's been going on, why are you in clinic today, or why are you in the hospital? This gives you a sense sort of overall about how well they're tracking stuff. And then because I'm the ethics lady, I throw in step 2, does this patient really want to make their own decisions? So somebody who has decisional capacity, who has their wits about them, has the prerogative to say, no, I don't really want to make that decision. I defer to this other person who I trust to make decisions for me. And so this just kind of highlights that. So if the person does want to make their own decisions, then we get into the decision-making abilities. So do they have an understanding of the risks and benefits and alternatives treatments that you're going to offer? So you might ask them, how can we treat your problem? Are there other options? And what have you been told about the risks and benefits of the different options? A little aside, I think sometimes we're pressed for time and we give them a bunch of information and then we say, well, do you understand? And the person may be apt to say, well, yeah, but we haven't assessed if they really do understand or not. And someone who, for whatever reason, maybe they have cognitive impairment, or maybe they're freaking out about this diagnosis and they didn't hear a thing you told them, they may not feel comfortable saying that, no, they don't understand. So one way, instead of just asking if they understand, is to use this teach back method. So one thing you could say is, I'm not sure I explained that very well. To help me make sure I was clear, could you tell me in your own words what you've heard about the different options? And you can adjust this to whatever works with your style. but have them repeat back in their own words, so you know that what you told them did get in there. Okay, so that's understanding. Next, appreciation. So do they, again, have an appreciation of how the treatment options apply to their own situation? So what will happen if you get treatment? What will happen if you don't get treatment? And what treatment makes the most sense for you? With reasoning, we want them to explain their choice. Like, why is that the best choice for them? And you want to think about whether that fits with how they've made other decisions in their life. And then making a choice and maintaining over time, again, what's the best treatment for you? So if we go back to Mr. G, I'm going to give you a little more information about him. So he can tell you he has a sore on his leg. He can point to where he has pain. He can tell you that a pain pill that he's getting doesn't work. And he can remember previously receiving a different pill that made him sleepy and more confused, but that decreased his pain, and says he wants that one. So again, thinking of what I just told you in terms of these 4 decision-making abilities. So I put them up there in the corner just so we remember. So does he have an understanding? Well, yeah, he can tell us that he's got a sore. I mean, that's not a very in-depth understanding, but I think is good enough. Does he have an appreciation? Does he understand that this is about him? Well, yeah, he can point to where he's got the pain. And what about his reasoning? Well, he's able to say that the current medicine he's getting isn't working, and this other thing made him sleepy and confused, but it helped his pain more, and he wants that one. So I think, again, not super sophisticated reasoning, but I think it's valid, and he makes a choice. So I would say that, yeah, he does have decisional capacity to make this decision about his pain management. Now I'm going to go on with the story a little bit. So luckily, over time, his wound heals, but later on, he develops lung cancer. And the treatment options now are going to include immunotherapy, chemotherapy, radiation, and for him, making a decision is now going to involve weighing the risks and benefits and alternatives of all these different treatments, understanding the statistics about the chances of benefit of the different treatments, and also understanding the information about all the potential side effects. So when this is all brought up with him later on and his dementia has progressed, he's really not able to make that decision. So that leads me to this point, that capacity is decision specific, and that limited capacity is going to be more common than global in capacity, right? So as people, may have dementia, they may be able to make some decisions, but not others. And one of the things we will often see is someone may not be able to make the medical decision, especially when it's something complicated, like, palliative chemotherapy, but they may be able to say, I don't understand that, but I trust, person X to step in and make that decision for me. So they may be able to designate somebody to be their healthcare agent through a durable power of attorney for healthcare, but they can't make that decision. And then the last point is that incapacity is not always permanent, right? So someone may have a delirium, and when they're more delirious, they may not be able to make the decision, but when they're less delirious, they may. So if whatever decision that needs to be made can wait, we may want to do our assessment when they're doing as good as possible. And a little bit more about doing these assessments. So we are going to do a more stringent assessment when the consequences are more serious or irreversible, such as if we're making a decision about an amputation or withdrawing life-sustaining treatments. And I throw this in just to make the point that as people approach the end of life, a fair number of them actually lose capacity. So in this study of 145 patients with advanced cancer, initially about 80% could make their own decisions, but about 40% had lost capacity as the hospitalization went on. A bit more about decisional capacity. So refusing something that somebody thinks is in your best interest doesn't automatically mean that you don't have capacity, right? We all, from time to time, refuse things that others might think were in our best interests, right? We don't have to share, but just keep that in mind. And then there isn't a sort of a number on a cognitive test that automatically means somebody doesn't have capacity. So we can't go with that. And then my last point here is that it's really important to document when you've done one of these assessments, because after the fact, we can't really go back and assess what the patient was like at that time. But if there's documentation about the conversation, that can be really helpful. So a summary with some of these decision-making myths. So people with cognitive impairment or mental illness aren't automatically incapacitated. Capacity isn't an all or nothing phenomenon. It's decision specific. Now, okay, if you're in a coma, you can't make any decisions, but for most people, they can make some decisions. Lack of capacity isn't always permanent, i.e. if somebody has delirium, and refusing a recommended treatment doesn't automatically mean somebody has incapacity. Whew, okay, that's the first section. And just a reminder that spring is coming. All right, let's do another case. This is the case of Mr. R. This is also a made-up case and a picture from the internet. So Mr. R is a previously healthy 90-year-old man with no family who'd been living independently. He's hit by a car and sustains a humeral fracture. He refuses an operation to fix it, and each day he waits, his arm is going to be harder to fix. And each day he waits, there's also going to be a decreased possibility of him being able to continue to live independently. So there's a little urgency here. When people talk to him, he can explain that he has a broken arm, and he can explain that the surgery would repair it. He can repeat the risks and benefits of surgery, but he's still refusing the surgery. So if we go back and we think of our 4 decision-making abilities that we're going to assess, we're going to apply those to Mr. R. So does he have an understanding? Well, he seems to, right? He knows that he's got a broken arm. He knows his surgery is going to fix it. He knows the risks and benefits of the surgery. So that's a pretty good understanding. What about appreciating? Well, he seems to realize that he's got a broken arm. So he sort of appreciates that what you're talking about is that. Next one is reasoning. And so if we look at what I've told you so far, there's not a lot about his reasoning. How is he getting to this point of refusing the surgery when he can rattle off all this other stuff? So I would argue that we want more information about his reasoning. We want him to explain, why. Why is he not going along with the surgery? And choosing, he's been pretty consistent about not wanting the surgery. So it seems like in doing our assessment, we need more information about reasoning. So here we go. So further questions reveal that he's scared of the surgeons and thinks they are only offering the surgery because they want to make money. He's found to be paranoid and possibly psychotic. So once we get that information, we realize that Mr. R probably cannot make his own decisions. Now, as an aside, you might be asking, well, do you need all four decision-making abilities? And how much of each one do you need? And you're going to hate the answer, but it sort of depends, right? This is all very nuanced and is up to the person doing the assessment to kind of get a gestalt of what they think. Does the person really get it or not? And again, I would argue that it sort of depends on the seriousness and how irreversible the decision is going to be. So back to Mr. R, now what do we do? We've got a guy with a broken arm who doesn't want surgery, who is paranoid. So usually in this situation, we need to find somebody else to come in and help make that decision, right? We need a legal surrogate. And so here I have kind of the rule within the VA system and the law in Washington state about how you identify a legal surrogate. And the way to do it is you start at the top of the list and you go down until there is one or more person in a category. And different states, if you get down to, say, adult children, and there are 5 kids, how do you figure out who makes the decision? And there are some states that are consensus states, and there are some states that are majority states. So it depends. It isn't automatically the oldest kid or loudest or richest. There are laws around how to do this. Now, I know many of you are not in Washington state or at the VA. So I urge you to look at this website. So the American Bar Association every couple of years updates this. So in this document that you get to through this website, you can see every state's law and what their hierarchy is. It's pretty cool. And some states have some crazy stuff on their hierarchies. I'll just stop at that before I say something embarrassing. Okay, so that's that section. Isn't this cool? Ooh, I would love to be there. All right, moving on. Let's do another case. So now we've got the case of Mrs. C. So this is another kind of made up case and another picture from the internet. So Mrs. C, she's an 82-year-old woman with mild dementia who lives in an assisted living facility. She's brought to the clinic by a caregiver for routine follow-up. And since she was last in the clinic, she's had 3 admissions for CHF in the past 5 months. And during one of them, she required restraints due to delirium with agitation. And with all of this going on, her renal function has been worsening. So you're worried about her renal function and think decisions will need to be made soon about whether or not she would want dialysis. You talk to her about her kidney function, and she responds that she's urinating just fine and her kidneys don't hurt. She says her kidneys are fine and people need to stop making such a fuss. So from the clinician's perspective, her kidneys are worsening and, they're trying to figure out, would she want dialysis in the future? And from her perspective, her kidneys are fine and everybody's just making a fuss. So This is a situation where we really want to know if she's able to make a decision about dialysis. So here we go. We're going to go through our steps. So one, we're going to want to figure out what she already knows, right? So we might ask something like, tell me about your condition, or what's been going on, or why are you in clinic today? Again, trying to get a sort of stepping back, big picture, how her thinking is working. We want to know if she wants to make her own decisions. And then we're going to assess her understanding of her diagnosis and treatment options, right? So you might say something like, I'm worried about how your kidneys are working. When kidneys aren't working, there are different things we can do. Some people want dialysis, which involves blah, blah, blah. Some people don't want dialysis. And we would want to do our teach back. So we would ask her to repeat back in her own words. Noting if she mentions, one, that her kidneys aren't working, two, some of the ways to approach kidneys that aren't working, and if she can tell us any of the risks and benefits and alternatives to dialysis. So that's looking at her understanding. Appreciation, right? How do these treatment options apply to her own situation? Well, can she tell us what will happen if she has dialysis and what will happen if she doesn't have dialysis? What's her reasoning behind the thing she picks? Can she explain that to us, why she thinks dialysis is or isn't a good choice for her? And if we have the luxury of asking her more than once, does she tell us the same thing different times? As a short aside, this is another approach you can use that comes from Dr. Mark Siegler in Chicago. So he has these 5 questions he likes to ask people, which I think is another nice way to do this. So, what's your main medical problem right now? What treatment has been recommended? If you receive this treatment, what will happen? And if you don't receive this treatment, what will happen? And then finally, why have you decided to or not to receive this treatment? So this is another way you can do it. Some people sometimes ask if there are, instruments you can use to do these assessments. And there are a couple. There is the ACE, or the Aid to Capacity Evaluation. The thing is, the psychometric properties were praised in a JAMA study, but it's only been used in like 1 paper. So keep that in mind. There are 8 questions, so it is relatively quick, and I'm going to show you some of it in the next slide. There's also this MacArthur Competency Assessment Test that has been more rigorously tested, but it takes 30 minutes to do, and it's usually used in research, and you need to pay for it. So keep that in mind. So the ACE, some of the things that you assess in it are, the patient, if they're able to understand their medical problem. Are they able to understand the proposed treatment? Are they able to understand the alternatives to the proposed treatment? Are they able to understand the option of refusing? And finally, are they able to understand the consequences of accepting and refusing treatment? So back to Mrs. C. She's assessed, and the clinician decides that she really can't make decisions about dialysis. She's not able to repeat back what you've said. She doesn't believe her kidneys are working. So, one, she doesn't really have understanding, and she doesn't have appreciation. So now what? Again, we would go to our legal hierarchy of surrogates, and we would find the person who is her legal surrogate, who could step in and help make that decision. Okay, there's that section. Let's keep going. So, what happens when a patient can't make their decisions? Well, we've already talked about how we're going to try to find that person's legal surrogate. But sometimes we can't find anyone. I'm here at the VA, and at the VA, we have a fair number of guys, mostly guys, because I'm at the VA, right? Who really don't have anyone, which is really sad. And so when that's the case, um, often states or organizations have policies about how you may be able to make some decisions. And in those situations, often we will apply to the courts for guardianship for a person so that the court can assign a guardian who then can make medical decisions. Or there's this new entity called supported decision making. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I also want to make the point that just because someone can't make their own decisions, we still ideally want them to assent to the treatment, right? If Mrs. C has a legal guardian who says, yes, please do dialysis, and it's, the day for dialysis, and she says no, ideally, we're not going to tie her down and ship her off for dialysis, because then we're sort of traumatizing somebody. We're going to hope that, maybe her legal surrogate or others can sort of encourage her so that she agrees to it. Now, in looking at the various different state hierarchies of surrogates, on that American Bar Association document, some states actually address the issue of no surrogates and have specific rules about how to proceed and who can proceed and make decisions. So Idaho, Montana, and Oregon all have information about what to do in their state laws, which is cool. Now, I mentioned supported decision making. And this, I think, is a relatively new thing. So I just wanted to mention it briefly so you guys at least have heard about it. And what is it? So it was initially developed to promote independence in people with disabilities when they turned 18 in order to avoid them being assigned a guardian. And what it is an alternative to guardianship. Some of the benefits of it is it promotes an individual's autonomy and their independence. And it also helps protect their individual rights. Because once somebody has a guardian, they actually lose that right to make their own decisions. And so if there's something we can do to protect somebody's rights, we're going to do that. What this is a written document that has the names of, one or more of these supporters and their relationship to the patient. It has a listing of the areas the person wants help with decision making. And it also explains how the supporter is going to help. You can go to this website, this WashingtonLawHelp.org, to learn even more about this. I should probably say, so I'm at the VA, and at the VA, we do not have a supported decision-making process. We have sort of other ways to do things. But I think this is really very cool. So here's an example of what might be in one of these documents. And I pulled this off this Washington Law Help website. So it could say something like, my supporter may help me with making everyday life decisions relating to the following. So you could check, whether you want help obtaining food, clothing, or shelter, whether you want help taking care of your health, whether you want help managing financial affairs, whether you want help with other things. There is a statement that the supporter is not allowed to make decisions. They're just helping that person make decisions. And then it may have something like this. To help me with decisions, my supporter may, so help me access, collect, or obtain information that is relevant to a decision, including medical, psychological, financial, educational, or treatment records. The supporter may help me understand my options so I can make an informed decision, and may help me communicate my decision to appropriate persons. So, pretty neat. In looking around, I found that supported decision making is already legal in these states. So, depending on where you are, if you're in Alaska, Colorado, Delaware, Illinois, Indiana, Louisiana, Nevada, New Hampshire, New York, North Dakota, Rhode Island, Texas, Virginia, Washington, D.C., or Wisconsin, I think there is a mechanism to use supported decision making. So pretty cool. And I suspect, I think this has been working fairly well, and it helps also unburden the legal system. So if there are fewer people needing guardianships, and I know often the legal system is sort of overburdened with those requests. So if there are fewer coming in, maybe the people who need guardians can get them faster, and more people can maintain some ability to continue to be involved in making their own decisions. So I think over time, there are going to be even more states where this is legal. So that's sort of what I was going to say. So in summary, hopefully we got through this. I think I was able to define the 4 types of capacity. So we talked a little bit about financial capacity, testamentary capacity, dispositional capacity, and then capacity for medical decisions. Mentioned several of the decision-making myths so that you're aware of those. We went through a way to do an assessment of the 4 decision-making abilities, which again are understanding, appreciating, reasoning, and choosing. We talked about how you do that assessment, and then we reviewed options for when a patient lacks capacity. So, I think we have lots of time for questions. So thanks for hanging in there. Maybe I will stop sharing, although I love this picture, just so I can see what there is. So,
Thank you so much. I had some initial thoughts about APS. Melissa said APS is a voluntary program now. If someone declines services, they don't investigate. Is that maybe state specific or?
I don't know. And I suspect we have social workers on who could probably tell us that. I am aware that if APS shows up at your door and you don't let them in, they're not going to break down your door.
Yeah.
So it looks like what's coming in, it's voluntary some places and not other places. Oh man, thanks you guys.
And Tamara said she works in Alaska as an APS worker, and they provide service for vulnerable adults age 18 and above. And she mentioned that the 5% reporting financial abuse on that National Elder Mistreatment Study was probably much below the actual number.
Yeah, and the 5% was just abuse by family members.
Yeah.
But I agree that it's probably, even that's probably higher, which is just kind of tragic.
And then someone had asked about, isn't applying for guardianship very costly and time consuming?
I know it's time consuming. Um, I think the petition can be made without people paying, but if you are assigned a guardian, oh, sorry, my lights always go out at this point. If you're assigned a guardian, I think they look at your assets, and if you have assets, they go towards paying the guardian.
I think that's correct.
And again, we have social workers on the call who know more about this stuff than I do, so feel free to chime in if I get anything wrong, please.
Susan asks, not sure if you know this, but is it legal in Montana in so much as it now is mentioned in the guardianship statutes? Susan, I'm not sure what you mean about is what legal. Maybe the um, I'm not sure. I'm sorry, Susan. I think if you can post a little bit more clarification to your question. And someone is asking about a credit report or certificate for participation in the sessions. I'll put a note about that in a minute. Susan says it's not voluntary in Montana. It
Hmm.
is a voluntary program in California.
Hmm.
It is costly, Chris says. Cricket is asking, can you tell us, are the 4 decision-making abilities the same for each type of capacity, or is it just for medical capacity?
So I think of those as mostly for medical capacity, although you can also kind of use them for dispositional capacity. So
Okay,
making decisions about whether someone really can live independently or not.
gotcha. What if you have an adult child who already has medical decision making, but now needs financial, as the older adult is not financially taking part of bills and is part of the VA? In other words, the adult child got medical decision making capacity, but not financial.
Oh, yeah, and so there are durable power of attorney documents for medical decision making and separate ones for financial.
Yeah.
Um, and so it sounds like this is a question where someone has medical but not financial. And
Yeah, I
that,
think they call that guardianship of the
well,
estate.
then if so in Washington State, they just, so if this gets really messy, but if a person loses the ability to designate someone as their durable power of attorney for finances, and then clearly can't manage their finances, then it gets really dicey. And yes, you can go to the court to get what they're now calling a conservatorship. They
Yeah,
used to say a guardian of person and a guardian of something
estate.
else, which was your stuff.
Yeah, it
But
was the
now it's
estate.
not guardian of stuff anymore. It's called a conservatorship, but that's just in Washington. Other states may use other terms.
Gets complicated, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Emma said in Alaska, vulnerable adults have the right to refuse services unless it's been determined by an expert that they lack decision making
Hmm.
capacity.
Hmm.
And Susan says in Montana, the statute that sets forth the guardianship criteria now requires the petitioner to state that supported decision making has been tried
Hmm.
before they have filed for guardianship.
Well, how cool is that?
Yeah.
Go Montana.
And David is asking if possible, could you re-show the slide on scams? The second
Oh, the
slide.
scam slide. Yeah. Oh, that's gonna mean I'm gonna have to figure this out. Okay. Well, you guys keep talking while
I
I
can I can
find it.
show it if you want.
Oh, oh, yeah,
Yeah,
that might be.
but I got your slides. Let's see.
Yeah, keep going, keep going, keep going. Couple more. Do. We're getting there. Like 2 more. You're
There.
close.
Is this the
Yeah.
one?
Oh, and thank you, Chris.
Yeah. No need to discuss. He was just wanting us to show it. So I'll put it up there for a few minutes. And it is available on the handout that you can get on our website.
Yeah, and this,
Um,
I think I found this thing online, so you can probably just Google this document that had it all. It had a lot of really interesting and sad information in it.
so just FYI, Susan, thanks for all this. Susan said in Montana, guardian over the person. There's a conservatorship over the money, and a full guardianship includes both.
Ah, interesting.
Sandra asks if decision making capacity is limited by professional scope.
Ah, so that's a good one. And I think, and I forgot to mention this. So people, I think sometimes think if capacity needs to be assessed, it's only, you know, a psychologist or a psychiatrist who can do it. And I would say no, any clinician should be able to do it. Um, if it's a really contentious one, you may want to get, the alleged experts to weigh in. But, and there are some disciplines, for example, on the ethics committee, I oversee, we have a whole bunch of different disciplines, and we sometimes get asked about capacity. And because I believe we're all equals, we don't do those evaluations because, for example, we have a chaplain. And although I think she would have a very good sense of whether someone really is getting all the information or not, within her discipline, chaplains don't assess decisional capacity.
Okay. Um, Let me just get down to a couple of other questions. Great questions. Um, Susan says scams can be reported to the Consumer Protection Office with the Attorney General's office in Montana, and the federal attorney's office will prosecute an interstate fraud if over $20,000. And she's wondering about your thoughts on the slums test.
So the St. Louis, whatever it is. Yeah, so different people use different ones. There's Mocha, there's slums, there's mini mental. Whatever you're familiar with, I would go for. And I'm sure in the second half of this, when you guys do more dementia specific, is there a talk that focuses on the different tests, Barb?
There is some of our introductory stuff under the dementia series. We'll talk about some of the different tests. Yeah.
Cool.
So I'm just putting here in the chat. Let's see if I had a Q&A. Oh, no. Just to let you know that I'll just mention it, that information about professional credit and getting a CE certificate for participation will be forthcoming within the next week. There'll be an attendance survey that you can fill out. And if you want approved continuing education credits, there's information posted about that on that direct series web page. And I'll be sending out information. And if you just want proof that you attended or a certificate that you attended, we can provide that. Much more detail about that coming out within the next week to all of those who are registered, and I'll be putting it in the chat for next week's lecture. I hope that makes sense. And let's see, Lindsay said, guardianship and conservatorship processes vary by state. Best to consult with your local social worker or guardianship office. The VA has fiduciary options for management of VA funds for veterans who lack financial capacity. And Social Security has a rep payee option for Social Security benefits. But if there are assets to be managed, those typically have to go through court processes like guardianships do, if arrangements were not made before capacity was lost.
Hmm.
Nicely informative. Thanks very, very
Yeah,
much, Lindsay.
thank you.
Okay, any other questions from folks? This is really a helpful perspective on decisional capacity, and particularly it's challenging because the state laws differ. So I really appreciated the background on just the kinds of considerations, those four considerations when trying to make decisions about decisional capacity. So, all right, I think we will conclude for the day, and I will see you all next week for our last series. There will be information coming within this week for the getting professional credit, for getting attendance credit, and for signing up for next term's dementia lecture series. Yes, so they're talking about thanks for the very helpful examples. The case studies were really helpful. Thanks so much, Dr. Vig.
Oh, thanks everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.